You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Welcome to Contours, conversations about issues in agriculture that impact us all. Contours is produced by the South Dakota State University College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences and SDSU Extension. These programs are distributed online through igrow.org.
Hello and welcome to Contours as we continue our open conversation with South Dakota's agricultural leaders and you. I'm Dr. Barry Dunn, Dean of the College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences here at SDSU. In this edition of Contours, we're going to talk about health, soil health. Soil is the factory that will help us produce the food the world will need to continue feeding the planet. Keeping soil healthy and productive is crucial to that effort. Here's what healthy soil can do for us all. It keeps valuable nutrients on the land and out of streams, lakes, and water supplies. It helps ensure productive and sustainable agriculture. It traps and stores carbon, helping to ease the effects of climate change. The most effective way to meet food production goals that will feed the growing world population is to improve production on existing ag lands. And we will need healthy soil to accomplish that. So what are some of the ways to improve the health of South Dakota soil? And if we had a soil health checkup in the state, what would be the prognosis? To provide some insight and answers, we have 4 people who are intimately involved in soil health in South Dakota. Jeff Zimprich is the Natural Resource Conservation Service State Conservationist for South Dakota. Doug Sieck is the chairman of the Soil Health Coalition. Doug also farms near Selby, South Dakota. Anthony Bly is an SDSU Extension soil field specialist. And Al Miron is a retired agribusinessman who farms near Crooks. Let's start with you, Jeff. In your role with NRCS, you have seen the soil health movement in the state grow rapidly. But for those in our audience who might be new to the topic, can you tell us what soil health means, both from a farmer's perspective and also from a consumer's perspective?
Thanks, Barry, for the opportunity to be here. And I'll give it a shot, but I'm hoping that all of us together will tackle that answer even better. I think from a producer's point of view, and you hit the nail on the head really already, is that it's a way to ensure productivity. I also think that when you think of health, health of a human, as in myself, it doesn't mean that I won't get sick. But I think health to me means that I'll probably be able to fight off or counteract any tough things that are thrown my way. And I think with healthy soil, it's the same way. We know Mother Nature's going to throw us curveballs. It's going to throw these producers curveballs. And I think that healthy soil is going to respond better and take it better when Mother Nature gives us a really hard, intense rain, and also when she doesn't give us enough rain at the right time. So I think it builds in resilience. I think for the consumers that may live in an urban area and maybe not tied to agriculture directly, I think that it benefits them as well, not only from the clean water that was mentioned earlier, the climate change mitigation that it provides, but also a sustainable, safe, hopefully cheap food supply for us, and not only for this generation, but also for the generations to come.
Anthony, you've had a great career as a scientist in the area of soils. Tell us, what are some of the characteristics of a healthy soil?
Well, Barry, there's a lot of indicators for a healthy soil, and NRCS has done a really good job at quantifying those indicators. And so depending on what soil or what region you're from, one of those may be more important than another. But it takes a collective improvement of all those to really have the total package when it comes to soil health. And for soils in South Dakota, we think about water infiltration and the ability to take and move water into the soil as well as air out of the soil. That's important too for the respiration of the microbial life that's in the soil. And so if we can get the water in a decent rate and have that air exchange, we have a healthy soil that can produce more carbon that we need and sequester carbon. That carbon builds more organic matter and promotes more biological life, and it's just like a train rolling that you can't stop once you get to that point.
Al, what are some of the farming techniques that you've used to build healthy soils on your farm?
Barry, I started farming in eastern Minnesota where a lot of tillage was the norm. And I moved to South Dakota in the 1970s, and of course, you know about the dry periods there. And I quickly moved to minimum tillage in order to conserve water. But I wasn't satisfied with what was happening with respect to soil erosion, and I wasn't happy with what would happen when we had those occasional dry periods. And so I moved to no-till in 1988, and if you recall, that's the year of pretty much a dry period in the entire United States, and I had good crops, and I've no-till since then and really never looked back.
Doug, the soil health movement in South Dakota, as I said, is really just come alive in the States. We certainly appreciate your leadership of that movement. It takes leaders like you in all of these areas to really get the attention of the public and move it along. What inspired you about soil health as an ag leader to lead this soil health coalition?
Well, I first went on some tours on other producers' operations, and I saw what they were doing with the cover crops and what they were doing with integrating livestock on their land. And they started talking about how they were lowering their input costs, and at the same time they were increasing production. And both of those things appealed to me. And as the deal progressed, I got involved with the South Dakota Grassland Coalition, and then we kind of morphed into helping out with the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition at Jeffrey's request. And it's just an interesting field that there's so many things happening with. The sky's the limit.
Well, Anthony, as you think about, as I think about what this has become, it's a little bit like going to a restaurant with a menu. There are so many topics. Help me sort and help our audience sort this out a little bit about the techniques that farmers can use. We hear about no-till. Doug talked about cover crops. What are these things?
Well, when you look and review those soil health indicators, there's one common thread there that's so important, and that's carbon. And carbon is really the key. And to build carbon in soils, we really have to stop tilling them or reduce tillage to a really low level so that we don't overdo the microbial activity in such a short period of time that we have carbon released prematurely. And so if we stop that tillage and start sequestering carbon and building carbon, like I said, that train just gets rolling and things start to improve. And microbial life improves and increases, and organic matter and carbon increase, and then the soil aggregates really start to form better. And so then we get that improved water movement into the soil and the air exchange, and when that happens, erosion stops, and we don't lose our nutrients into the streams, into the waterways, and it's just a good thing all around. So the tillage is really a big component of that. And then the cover crops and the livestock integration are almost equally important. It's really a total package when you think about it. And so if we can harvest sunlight and convert extra water in the landscape, use that sunlight and convert it to carbon, that's a win-win situation. And so those cover crops are very important in that as well. And then incorporating using the livestock, as Doug mentioned, to use some of those cover crops and cycle those nutrients through that animal, that just helps the microbial life as well. So I would say those are the main points as to really improving soil health.
Jeff, you're responsible for the Natural Resource Conservation Service's work in this area. You see soils all across our state. You've served our whole nation as a soil conservationist. What excited you about this process of getting soil health as a discussion topic and getting it on the land in South Dakota? Why is this so important for South Dakotans all South Dakotans to consider?
You know, I just think it just brings so many things together, and that's what's exciting to me about it. There's a lot of things that we do in conservation that maybe benefit the individual landowner the most. But I think with soil health, we are all winners. The entire state is a winner, and all the people who live here, you know. And we've talked a lot about the benefits to the soil, and it may seem like, well, those are direct benefits to producers. But really, there's offsite benefits, you know, and we mentioned them earlier, the water quality side and others. But not only more than just water quality, it could be water quantity. We've talked about infiltration. The soil is an excellent sponge that lets that water in and holds it, releases it slow, filters it. And you know, we've looked at several indications of things that would tell us that if we could just improve the health of our soils, we would allow much more of that moisture in, which should help us produce better crops of both grass and row crops, also allow less to run off. So when we get those times when too much rain falls, it's going to slow that runoff down. That's what gets me excited, is it just brings everything so much together. It's kind of a culmination of a lot of positive things.
Al, you farm in eastern South Dakota, and I know we hear a lot about crop rotation as part of the role as a tool to help improve soil health. How have you used crop rotations in your farm over the years to help improve soil health?
Well, in the eastern part of the state, as you know, we have primarily a corn-soybean type of rotation. I'm also trying to work cover crops in that, and I'm working with people here at SDSU on the cover crop aspect and incorporating that in there to have a little bit more diversification in the crop rotation. I might also add a little bit with respect to what Anthony indicated in terms of soil organic matter. And I've done some work at my place looking at soil organic matter in the fence line, which has never been plowed. And there the organic matter runs about between 5.5% and 6%. When I first started farming my farm, the organic matter was 2.5%. So in 100 years of farming, we reduced it from that 5.5% to 2.5%. In now 28 years of no-till, I brought that back up to about 4.5%. So I think we're making some good progress with our rotations, incorporating cover crops, that sort of thing, in building organic matter in our soils. And if we look at that a little bit further, and why is organic matter important? We've talked about the carbon sequestration, that sort of thing, but it also holds more moisture. Our organic matter holds moisture in the soil, and there are different estimates, but 1/4 to 1/2 inch of moisture for every % of organic matter. So if I can hold an extra 1/4 to 1/2 inch of water, that's rather critical during those dry periods that we might experience during the summer. In addition to that, if I can prevent runoff of an additional inch of water, now we're talking about some real numbers.
Doug, help us. What is a cover crop?
A cover crop is a crop that you bring in either after you've harvested one crop, or some people use a full season cover crop. Cover crops are mixtures of different species of plants, tailored to do what you want them to do. When we first start out with a cover crop technique, we'll usually use a shotgun approach where we'll mix maybe 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 things together, and we'll come in and plant that. And what happens out there is some of the plants, like the brassicas that are in the mixtures, the turnips and the radishes, do a wonderful job of stimulating the bacteria and the other microbes in the soil. And we kind of jumpstart that system with one of these shotgun cocktails. And they might have Sudan grass, pearl millet, you might mix in some oats, maybe some legumes like peas, clover, sweet clover, canola, just whatever you think to get the thing rolling. Then after you've got that working, and you might need to use that as a full season cover crop. You might need to take 1 year and dedicate to this year, I'm going to plant this field to a full season cover crop. And I'm going to let it grow up, and then I'll utilize it in the fall by grazing it. I'll integrate some livestock. And the livestock will graze about half of it, and they'll return about half of it to the soil as a readily absorbable form of nutrients, plant food. Okay, so we've got this full season cover crop, and we hook it in with some livestock to get the whole system going. Then once we get the system going, then we start taking more of a rifle approach, and we get to thinking, okay, what do I have to do to balance the diet for these microbes and the bacteria? And so I'm thinking, okay, I came off of a corn crop here. Okay, I need to come in with something that keeps living roots in the soil, something that'll we'll do a little bit this fall and come on next spring, and I might come in with another grass there, say winter wheat or winter rye, something like that. But then I'm thinking ahead, what am I going to plant there next? And maybe I'll come in with a soybean plant after that. So I've done grass, and then I've switched up with soybeans. Then after the soybeans, I fed it with a legume. What should I come in? Well, maybe grass is appropriate again. So we've kind of got two cover crop scenarios going on. We've got full season cover crops and we've got post-harvest cover crops. The full season cover crops are a little spendier mix. Okay? We're going to dedicate a whole season there. Let's spend some money on getting that soil going. The ones, if we're coming in after wheat harvest or maybe after corn harvest, they're not quite so expensive. We're not real concerned about doing a lot of things there. We're more concerned about keeping some living roots in the soil. Okay? And it's key on both of those. Let's try to bring some livestock in there, and let's do just like graze in a pasture. Let's take half and leave half. Because you'll find after you've jump-started that soil, all of a sudden these microbes and these bacteria, they're hungry little buggers. And you got to work to keep things out there. You have to switch to what they call high carbon to nitrogen ratio plants. Get more stuff out there that decays slowly. Maybe you're going to have to switch to things like oats and rye and sudan grass so you can lay some armor down on that soil. It's really interesting the way the dynamics change from, you look out here, you know, we used to do a wheat summer fallow rotation, and that fallow was just kind of black and dead, and we thought that was great. And now we've stimulated these microbes, and the challenge is keeping enough cover out there so it doesn't turn black.
The microbial life has gotten to such a good point that the crop residues that he has in his fields disappear really quickly. And that's one of the things we hear from producers that are considering no-till is that, what will I do with all that residue? Right. And so it does take a while for the soil to develop those populations of microbes to break that down. It does take a few years for that to happen, but in Al's longer-term no-till, it just disappears really quickly.
We can't forget about the earthworms. And when you dig up the soil and you see the earthworms there, Ray Archuleta has estimated that if you put a spade in the ground and pick up about 6 earthworms in it, there's 680 million there in that acre of ground. So in a sense, we're doing tillage, but we're leaving the earthworms and the microbes do that tillage.
Jeff, as I listen to Al and Doug, especially as farmers, you really hear the art of management come out. So how does your staff with the NRCS, how does your staff assist the Doug Siecks and the Al Mirons in South Dakota put these practices into play?
You bet. Great question. And I tell you what, the first thing I'll say is we have to do it in a partnership, because it's more work than any one organization should do, and I think we all will do it best if we do it together. So, and the other thing that I have to say before I dive into that too much is, listening to these two gentlemen talk about healthy soil, and I was out on Al's farm last week, I guess now, and seeing the passion in his eyes about his soil and how healthy it is, that's exciting. So, but what we do is we're working more and more to try to help people have an assessment. You know, it's a checkup. I don't think we have that mastered yet, but I do believe we're working that way more and more all the time. We can come out, we have infiltration kits. We can test infiltration on different fields that have maybe had different management practices. We can see what we'd see. We can maybe give estimates of how good we think it could be. We can check organic matter levels. We can ask questions about rotation and tillage systems. There are some new tests that are evolving that are really taking a close look at that activity, and even to the point where it's maybe going to turn back and tell us a little bit of the benefit in the terms of how you look at your nutrient management system. Maybe sometime there'll be a point where we can actually reduce nutrient management inputs because the soil's producing a lot of that. So it's an educator role. It's sharing information. I think a lot of what we do is we need to get those producers connected with other producers that have really got it figured out. So it's a partnership effort, just helping folks maybe see how they're doing it and look for different ways.
Anthony, the science behind this is pretty deep. I remember soils when I was an undergrad, and it's a lot of chemistry. It's pretty tough stuff. So as you work as an extension field specialist, how do you work with farmers and ranchers on understanding the science behind the soil?
Well, really, you know, I start with trying to learn about their operation, what they have on their farm, and what the crops they grow, and if they have livestock or not, and a need for forages or things like that, and a lot of the work that I do is involved in making recommendations to them based upon what they've told me, and you know, every farm is different, every ranch is different, and their needs are different that way, and so, you know, we really have to be really aware of that individual need, and from there we just go with the science and things that we know, that we've learned in academia and on farmers' fields and research plots and things, and we try to link them up with those that best fit.
Jeff, taking the metaphor of health, does your staff write a prescription for people, or how does this work when you're working with the Al's and the Dougs of South Dakota?
You bet. And really that prescription in a lot of ways is what we've called for over 80 years at SCS, now NRCS, a conservation plan. And really it would look at not only soil health, which is maybe a newer aspect, but it would also look at other practices on the land that may need to be there. And we'll incorporate into with a grazing plan, and it might mean fences and watering systems and all those things that need to make that whole system work. And you know, the other point that I'd make just really quick is I think that something that's been good for us, it's definitely good for someone who's not very smart as I am. When I listen to all these tough issues that are going on, you know, with the science behind this, it is more than my brain can handle. Thank God that we've gotten just some simple little demonstrations that make it all come home for us. Okay. And so we've got a rainfall infiltration demonstration we use. We talked about those infiltration rings. We've got a slake test that we use where you take two different soils, clods of soil, and you place them in water, and you kind of see what they do. And it really brings a lot of this together. There's a ton of science behind it that Jeff Zimprich can't explain, but I can see what happens when I watch it in front of me. So it's just a lot we can think. I'm glad that Mother Nature allows us to take some of those things, and she's got real complex things happening, and we can show it simply.
There's nothing like seeing people that aren't in soil science and so forth see those demonstrations, and sometimes you hear the breath in the crowd or the gasp, and that's really powerful. And those simple things that Jeff talked about are so strong and powerful that way. And recently I worked with a producer that it changed his thinking. In fact, he thought we did tillage to get water, help water get in the soil. I agree. And it changed his whole thought on why we do tillage and those types of things. And that's really powerful.
Every farm in South Dakota had a mixture of crops and livestock. And certainly when I was growing up in western South Dakota. But today there's a lot of specialization, and not every farm has livestock. So how could a grain farmer incorporate livestock into their soil health, their prescription? And you see it at a community level, Doug. How might it work in the Selby community, for example?
Yes, that's a good question, Barry. We have neighbors that don't have livestock that have corn stalk residue. That's a valuable resource to those of us raising cattle. When you're raising corn out there, you've got ton after ton of corn stover and stalks and husks out there. If we go out, if we can make a deal with our neighbor that we'll put some electric fence around their cornfield and we'll figure out the water, we'll either haul it or we'll let the cows eat snow. If we use those cows to just utilize 20% of that forage out there, it still leaves 80% of the residue out there, and the cow has a very healthy diet. And we see that. We're working with crop producers, and it's a win-win deal. We're putting livestock out there, and we're producing pounds of beef at a low cost, and they're seeing the livestock come out. And when the livestock are out there, they do more than just eat. You know, they're dropping the manure like we talked about. They're also dropping bacteria, and they're stimulating things in the soil. They're ramping up the microbial activity just like the cover crops did. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention and maybe talk in depth about rangeland too. The microbes and the bacteria in the rangeland are the same microbes that are out in the cropland. And just like we do things with cover crops to manage and feed those microbes, we also do things on the rangeland. On the cropland side, our big tools right now are cover crops and integrating livestock. On the rangeland side, we're using livestock and we're using rest and rotation. Okay? We're getting those cattle in somewhere, we're letting them graze that grass off, then we're getting them out of there. And we're learning and we're being taught by people in Jeff's office about the value of rest. When we let that plant rest out there, those roots blossom. When the stuff on top blossoms, it stimulates the microbes underneath. It goes back to the same thing as the cover crops. If we keep living, healthy roots in the soil, we stimulate everything that's going on under the soil. And when we take one of those 6-inch infiltration rings that we get from the NRCS, and we do like they did down at Al's, and we pound that into a range site that's been continuously grazed, it might take 20 minutes to a half hour for basically a water bottle full of water to soak in that ring. We can take that over to a pasture that's had extended rest periods and some sort of a rotational or even an intensive rotation. We can pound that same ring in, that same kind of soil. We can dump that bottle of water in there, and 20 seconds later it's in the ground. And we can dump another bottle of water in. And a minute and a half later, that's in the ground. And it's the same goal on both sides. We want to get that water to soak in. If that water is soaking in the ground, the microbes and the bacteria are probably pretty healthy. And if it's soaking in the ground, it's not running off polluting the streams, and we're building up a savings account for when the dry times come along. It can level this deal off really well.
Jeff, as I think about healthy soils and healthy rangeland and healthy cattle, what would soil health do to a community like Selby or Crooks or Winter, South Dakota, the communities that are the backbone of this state? What does that mean to a community, Jeff?
Well, I think that anytime we have more diversity in the crops and everything like that, I think it can mean more jobs, different kinds of jobs. So I think it creates those opportunities. And then I think you always have to throw in just the health of the overall natural resource base. The soil, as was stated earlier, is one of our best factories we have in the state. We want to keep that factory in great shape.
Great. We hope this has stirred your interest in soil health so that you want to learn more. If you do, you can find more about it on our iGrow website, igrow.org. And we've also set up some links on our website that will connect you to more information from the USDA NRCS and the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. I'd like to thank our guests today for providing insight, information, and inspiration. Thanks to Jeff Zimprich, Doug Sieck, my colleague Anthony Bly, and my friend Al Miron. That's all the time we have for this episode of Contours. Our next show will continue to explore issues of soil health in South Dakota, including how to determine the best use for land and how it has developed an increased awareness of land stewardship. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Contours.
Contours is a conversation about issues in agriculture that impact us all. These programs are produced by the South Dakota State University College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences and SDSU Extension. You can watch these programs on your local South Dakota Public Broadcasting station or by going online to igrow.org.